Good morning. This is Cynthia A. Johnson with StandUp Now. Thank you for tuning in to this show. I hope you find this half hour enjoyable and inspiring as we showcase regular people from the city of Detroit who are doing great things and really making a difference in our city, the city of Detroit. Good morning, family. This is Stand Up Now with Cynthia A. Johnson, and my co-host is none other than Miss Joyce Moore. Good morning, Joyce.
Good morning to you and to the family.
All right. You are listening to us on Gospel 1440 WMKM Reborn. And good morning. Good morning, Ms. Simpson. Tawana Simpson is a board member of Detroit Public Schools. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and you?
Very well. Thank you so much for joining us. Several other people who were invited. They include Governor Snyder, and whether or not they will join us, we're not sure, but we're going to go on with the information that we need to share. There was an article in Michigan Citizens a couple of days ago, and please correct me if I'm incorrect. Tell us about what's going on with Michigan Public Schools.
Well, there was a court ruling, and it was concerning Highland Park School. There was a case, and the circuit court ruled that the state was only responsible for making sure that public schools are financed, not the quality of the education that students receive.
Okay, and I'm just pulling that.
Well, just let me ask you this. Hey, Tawana, how you doing?
Hello, Joyce. How are you?
Just great, just great. It's good to hear from you. I guess my concern is when they create state laws, and don't they affect our educational system in terms of the quality of your education? Aren't there state laws that sort of dictate that?
Yes, it should.
Well, no, should or what they do. See, I need to know if there are some that currently do, and if that's the case, then those laws need to be presented to him to let him know that although you are financially responsible, there are laws, state laws that say that you have to help with the quality of education. For example, and this is just something I thought about when they used to have what was it in schools when you had people that went to your homes after you missed 3 days of school and came out and said that you were in violation of some rule or some ruling. That was dealing with the quality.
Yes, that's the revised state school code.
Okay.
I believe you're speaking of. And those are truancy officers when you miss X amount.
Right. Do they still have those truant officers around? Do they even exist?
We have very few left at DPS. Very few. A lot of truancy officers were laid off doing Robert Bob as financial emergency manager, and also under Roy Roberts as financial emergency manager / emergency manager.
Yeah, but my concern was not so much that they continually exist, but by how were they actually created in the first place? It had to be through state laws or through some policy or something to say that this was dealing with the quality, because if the student is not there, we don't have to worry about the quality. But if the student is there, then we have to worry about the quality. So I'm just saying that there's some kind of state laws that said that they had to have those?
I would take that on and make sure that I get that information to you. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't know. And as a board member, when I was elected as a board member in exile up under financial emergency managers, and we are not privy to those types of information as it relates to our district. We read about what happens in our district just like you do in the newspaper or hear it on the news or radio.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's back up just a little bit, because I was Governor Rick Snyder, he was invited. Also, Miss Carrie L. Moss, the executive director of American Civil Liberties, was also invited. Now, the issue that we are going to discuss, or that we're attempting to discuss this morning, 2-1 decision by way of the Michigan Court of Appeal, reversing an earlier circuit court ruling that there is a broad, compelling state interest in the provision of an education to all children. The Michigan Court of Appeal said the state has no constitutional requirement to ensure school children actually learn fundamental skills such as reading, but rather, like you said, Tawana, is obligated only to establish and finance a public education system regardless of quality. Now, I'm playing the devil's advocate right now. What's wrong with that?
Everything's wrong wrong with that.
Tell us what? What exactly?
What's wrong with this, first of all, is creating, I'm going to go back here to something, if creating reform schools is the goal to bring test scores up and the state actually cares about what our students understand, and that's what they're telling us the reason why they have these reform schools, such as the EAA, that they want to provide more charter schools. I mean, it's a contradiction.
That's right.
On one hand, they're creating districts, breaking up districts, adding more school districts in our state, and then they come back with this ruling and say that it's not their obligation. If it's not their obligation, then let the educational systems go. Put a cap on charter schools. Allow DPS and its board members and its staff and its students and its community to rebuild itself.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you.
That's right.
Because the fundamental
That's okay.
Okay, the fundamental skills are reading, writing, and arithmetic, right, or math. And if those basic skills aren't taught in schools, where are these people? Where's the generation? Where's the future generation?
Right. I mean, and this is a practice of theirs that they do over and over and over again. Because as a board member that was elected by district, I was sued by the Attorney General my first year as a board member. And
you were what?
I was sued by the Attorney General.
You were sued by the Attorney General?
7 board members that was elected by district for Detroit Public Schools were sued. And we were sued because they said we were elected illegally. Now, what happened is we had an emergency manager. Roy Roberts was in at that time. Roy Roberts called for the election, paid for the election. Citizens ran, democracy worked, we were elected, and then they turned around and sued us because they said that because we were no longer a first-class school district, we were elected illegally. But mind you, the state was the entity that called for the election. So we went to court. We won that. They had to allow us to finish our term, and that's one example. The second example was with the emergency manager's 18-month term. Now, Kevin Noor, as you know, is leaving. He's done his 18 months and he's leaving. But unlike the city of Detroit, DPS still has an emergency manager because we had Roy Roberts when PA 436 came into existence. Roy Roberts stepped down, and then we received Jack Martin as a emergency manager. So we went to court in Ingham County, and we asked the court, do Roy Roberts has this 18 months and Jack Martin, is that one 18 months or do each person get their own 18 months? The judge came back and told us that each emergency manager gets their own 18 months, and as she reads PA 436 and believes it to be so that the governor has the option of every 17 months appointing a new emergency manager to the Detroit Board of Education, and therefore we can have an emergency manager forever if the governor choose to do that.
Well, see, that's what we have to go back and look at the laws of how they were created.
We have another guest on the line. Good morning.
Good morning. This is Madison Page.
Hey, Madison Page. Good morning, Madison. Madison is the founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance, and she, too, has much information with regard to what's going on with public education. Madison, did you hear the conversation that we were having?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and would you please give your take on what's going on here in Michigan, specifically in Detroit?
So what's happening is unconscionable, right? And it's a usurpation of democracy. It's also very short-sighted. I mean, every other advanced society recognizes that an investment in education and an investment in our children, and frankly, all the way through university level, is something that returns value for us as society. And what's happening in Detroit is unconscionable. It is, but I will say that it is a test lab. Unfortunately, this is happening in a lot of places across the country, and all eyes are on Detroit right now. And we're going to have to see if this is something that has to be fought. And I think this type of overreach is something that ALEC and some of the other large organizations that would like to privatize schools and kill our public education system in every jurisdiction across the country are using what's happening in Detroit as sort of a test lab. It's almost like a petri dish to see if it works, to see what works and what doesn't. It's really going to be up to the people of Michigan, the people of Detroit, and frankly, the people across the country to recognize that this is not just happening in Detroit. It's going to happen everywhere if we don't, as a people, step forward and say we're not going to allow this.
Absolutely. Detroit, as you have alluded, Detroit is the testing ground, and Detroit is being watched all over the country, all over the world, as to what this governor is allowing. Now, when Governor Snyder ran for governor for this last term, he indicated that he was very pro-education. Did he have anything to do with, and I'm asking this question because I want you to share with the listening audience what you both know. Did he have anything to do with, and did he make any arguments to the Michigan Court of Appeals so that they came up with this ruling that Michigan's only responsibility is to supply money and not to make sure that all children have a quality education?
Is that a state law? We know where we are. We don't know where we were. We need to know what kind of laws existed before to protect our children in terms of education and making sure and ensuring that they got the education. I guess that's one. And two, we already know what the problem is. Then the question then becomes, how do we rectify it?
Okay, but going back to my question to Madison and to Juana,
Right.
This decision, this 2-1 decision by the Michigan Court of Appeals, the circuit court had already ruled that Michigan was responsible for not only the financing of the public education, but also
Equality.
they were responsible for quality of education. Now, who came up and said, no, we don't want that?
What law?
It had to be a person first.
Person? Law.
Okay. So my question is, if either one of you know, what person came up and said, oh, no, we can't do that. We're not responsible for the quality of education.
Do you have any idea?
Madison?
Well, I think the easiest. I don't know a specific person to point it to. What I can say is that this is something that has been pushed by financial interests across the country. ALEC in January of 2014, just a few months ago, almost a year ago, the American Legislative Executive Council launched its it's a new branch of their organization focused exclusively on local politics. So what they've been able to do at the state level by, basically bribing state legislators to pass legislation that they've crafted themselves and push legislation that embraces privatization of everything. Now they have literally, in January of 2014, started another branch of that system that specifically focuses on municipal government. So I would say that probably the big elephant in the room, no pun intended, is the system that we have of legislative corruption that's brought on by the money in politics and organizations like ALEC, who have been very active at the state level for the last several decades and now are retraining their efforts on local municipal governments. And I would add one more thing. Was something that a lot of people have not heard of, and we have been paying attention to this since about mid-2013. The other thing that they've done is they've been pushing a legislative initiative that literally strips local government of power to make local municipal decisions. This is another piece of ALEC legislation that's been pushed in state houses across.
When you say ALEC, explain to the listening audience what ALEC is. I know what it is, ALEC, but what does it stand for?
Right. So ALEC stands for the American Legislative Executive Council. And it is Koch brothers funded, which is Koch brothers is, if people don't know, is a huge Republican donors. Koch brothers are billionaires, and they donate very heavily to Republicans and libertarians. And they actually are, in fact, libertarians. They ran on a libertarian ticket in 1980. And if you go back and actually look at the platform that they ran under, it is ominously close to what we are experiencing today. They are systematically dismantling everything that has to do with government. So ALEC is the organization. It's somehow a 501c3 organization.
A nonprofit and an organization who is exempt from taxes. Go on.
A tax-exempt organization, and not only is it a tax-exempt organization, but somehow they've managed to maintain their 501c3 status, which is supposed to be a social service and humanitarian, and they've faced some lawsuits behind that as well. But what they do is they craft legislation, they give it to state legislators, and most of the state legislators just go on and pass it. And the reason why the state legislators pass ALEC-crafted legislation is because of the campaign donations and the support that they get from the members of ALEC, who are wealthy donors or business people. Sometimes they're businesses. They have business members that contribute to this organization to keep it going. And they lobby very heavily, even though the 501c3 designation prohibits that. So ALEC has had a tremendous amount of control and a very deleterious effect on state government, and now they're focusing their attention on local government. And Detroit's situation is a very, very good example of that. We see the Republicans at the state level starving local governments, starving state governments, and then, of course, when government doesn't work, they say government doesn't work, and that's why we need to do all of these terrible things. So it's sort of reinforcing, self-reinforcing, and it is really going to have to take the voice of every Michigander, every Detroiter, every American to step up and say, we're not going to allow this. This is a bridge too far. We're not going to allow it.
I would assume that because of the Michigan Court of Appeals reversing an earlier circuit court ruling, that now this is the lay of the law.
Yeah, okay, and that sounds sort of, which has the precedence, the circuit court or appeal court? Appeal court has priority, right?
The appeals court.
Okay.
If you don't like something, then you go to another level.
Okay. Now, can they appeal the appeal? Because if there's a state law,
it can go to the Supreme Court.
Let it go. Because if any law previously existed that said, or mandated, as you said, the quality of education is also part of the responsibility of the state, then it needs to go to the Supreme Court, because future generations, you're talking about our children now, but you're also talking about our children in future generations. And so we need, we can sit back and say what we want, or we have to take action. That's what I'm saying. We have to take action.
I would also say that I'm not a lawyer.
Neither am I. Neither am I.
I would also say that the quality of education is inherent in the social contract. I mean, you don't hire somebody and say, well, I'm going to build.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if it's quality or not. You don't hire people to pave your roads and go, well, it doesn't really matter if the roads are good or not, if they stand up to, pressure or whatever, or I'm going to build this bridge. When we invest in public work, when we pay money for anything, the quality of that thing being at least at a minimum level of quality is inherent in the contract.
That's right.
I think that the argument has to be that, yes, of course, there is a responsibility for the state to provide at least a base minimum of a certain level of quality. It's ridiculous. Where else on earth do you ever pay for something where you don't expect a minimum of quality when you get the thing that you pay for? And as citizens, we are investing, and
right.
We do expect our bridges to be able to be driven over. We do expect the schools to put out students who can read and write and add and subtract.
Right, right.
And that's without a doubt.
That's what I was asking you earlier. Is there a law specifically that says that? We need to find that out. And
I don't think there's a law, but I do think that it's inherent. I mean, when things, I'm not a lawyer, but I was having a conversation with someone earlier about a different subject, and they said intent is sort of the guiding principle that you use in the law to determine whether or not when there are gray areas. So what is the intent when we say state has a responsibility to provide education? Well, obviously the intent is that education be valuable, that it has
absolutely
some level of quality, some level of quality.
But who determines that?
Nobody would make that statement without some intent being inherent in the statement itself.
So you say it's part of the language is interpretation to mean intent, as opposed to be actually written out to state fact.
I think this is what you're saying, Madison, it doesn't matter whether or not it's written or not. You spend money and you want to get quality. And we have children who are attending school. We don't want kids who are just attending school and not getting an education.
Right.
I agree. I
The
totally
intent
agree.
is inherent. Right. Intent is inherent in it. I mean, I was having this discussion. It was completely a separate discussion about, for example, the ACA, and we were talking about, and a friend of mine who's a lawyer, this is why I said I'm not a lawyer, but she used this language. She says anytime in the law when you have a gray area, intent is just sort of the standard that's used. Like, what was the intent? What was the intent of the legislation? Like, when they wrote it, what was the intent? And I think that it's pretty obvious that if you say the state has a responsibility to provide education, the intent is that we expect that education meet a certain standard, of a minimum standard.
Absolutely. Across the board in the state of Michigan, and I know you know this, the cap on charter schools has been lifted. There is no cap, so they can have as many charter schools as they want. Madison, we must do this again. I want to thank both Tawana Simpson and Madison Page. Madison is the founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance, and you can find Bold Blue Media Alliance online. What is your website?
Okay, so people can reach us at boldbluemedia.com. Pretty simple, boldbluemedia.com.
Thank you. God bless you all. I love you. And this is Cynthia A. Johnson with Stand Up Now Gospel 1440 WMKM Reborn.
Gospel 1440 AM is WMKM, Inkster, Detroit. Welcome back to the...
It's also very short-sighted, I mean, every other advanced society recognizes that an investment in education, investment in our children, and frankly, all the way through university level is something that returns value for us as a society. And what's happening in Detroit is unconscionable, but I will say that it is a test lab. Unfortunately, this is happening in a lot of places across the country.